Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the ongoing ethnic violence in Manipur affecting the town of Moreh. We also talk about the director of IIM-Calcutta resigning from his post. But first, we talk about the controversy surrounding the terms India and Bharat. On Tuesday, a political row erupted after the government sent out a G20 summit dinner invitation in the name of the President of Bharat, instead of the President of India, as is customary. These invitations were sent to the leaders and delegates who will be attending the upcoming G20 summit that will be taking place in New Delhi over Saturday and Sunday. Now, as the opposition began to attack the ruling BJP over this, it also came to light that a government booklet talking about the Prime Minister's upcoming visit to Indonesia mentions Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister of Bharat. All this has now given rise to rumours that the government is planning to change the country's name during a special session of the parliament scheduled for later this month, the agenda for which is still not known to the public. In this segment, we will discuss the government's response to these rumours. But before we do that, it's important for us to note that Article 1 of the Constitution mentions, quote, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states, unquote, and that the framers of the Constitution had debated this very issue. When we spoke to Indian Express's Adrija Chowdhury, she told us what the members of the Constituent Assembly thought of the word India.
So, right from the first time when, the first article of the Constitution was read out, there was this whole debate on, what it should be like, whether India should come before Bharat, after Bharat, commas, and things like that. Okay, and there were quite a few of the members who were rather against the use of the term India because, they saw it as a reminder of the colonial past. So, for instance, you had Seth Govindas, who was a representative from Jabalpur, and he insisted that Bharat should be given preference over India and that it should be underlined that India was just a substitute for Bharat in the English language. Then, there was Govind Ballabh Pant from the United Provinces. He argued that India was a name that was given to the country by foreigners who had robbed us of our freedom. And he said, and I quote, if we even then cling to the word India, it would show that we are not ashamed of having this insulting word which has been imposed on us by alien rulers. So there was this idea that, India is like a foreign word and, it's something that we need to get rid of.
Okay, so many of the members believed that India had a lot of colonial connotations.
Yes.
And so did these members prefer Bharat over India?
So clearly, there was no opposition to the word Bharat being used in the Constitution and the name being Bharat, except that the debate here was more about where it should be placed, whether it should be before or after India. But definitely there seems to have been a consensus that Bharat needs to be there in the Constitution.
And what exactly were the arguments made to use the word Bharat?
So, as far as Bharat was concerned, most of the Constituent Assembly members, they were making references to ancient Indian literature. So, someone like Seth Govindas, he pointed out that Bharat has been mentioned in Puranic literature. Both the Vishnu Purana and the Brahma Purana, they mention Bharat. Then there was Hari Vishnu Kamath, who argued that Bharat or Bharatvarsh or Bharat Bhumi, these are all names derived from the scriptures. There were also many who said that the Chinese traveler Yuan Sang, he had referred to the country as Bharat. So essentially, these were references to ancient Indian literature, sources from travelers, and references like these, which all the assembly members were making to say that, this name has been in existence for much longer than perhaps India has. So there was also Hari Vishnu Kamath, who insisted that the word India should only appear as a translation of Bharat, and he referenced the Irish constitution, and he argued that even in Ireland, when the state became independent, they had changed the name, and the Irish constitution had read that the name of the state is Ire, or in the English language, Ireland. So it was on similar grounds that he argued that in the Indian constitution also we must have Bharat, that is India, in the English language.
And so how did they finally settle it? How did India manage to appear before Bharat?
See, throughout the debates, Mr. Ambedkar, who was the chairman of the drafting committee, he had to keep reminding the members that, the debate is not about whether Bharat should be included or not, and there need not be any debate on the civilizational origins of the term Bharat, but the debate over here, or the confusion over here, is rather about where it needs to be placed in the article. And even though there were quite a few members who were opposed to the use of the term India, eventually the majority of the Constituent Assembly members, they argued for having both India and Bharat. So in the final constitution, what happened was both India and Bharat were kept on the same footing.
Now, even though the Constituent Assembly resolved it, this debate has continued even after 76 years, at least in certain pockets. For example, BJP's ideological parent, the RSS, has always used the term Bharat, ever since it was formed.
Since its inception, that is since 1925, as long as we know RSS has existed.
That's Indian Express's Deeptiman Tiwary, who reports on RSS for the paper.
And RSS has consistently used Bharat in place of India. Made a special effort to use the term Bharat in place of India. Although it's not that it has never used the word India at all. It has. But it has always been its attempt that as far as possible, it is the term Bharat which is used to denote the country and not India.
So basically the RSS views India as a colonial legacy.
Correct. It has been a long-standing argument of RSS that India is not a term that has organically originated from this land. Historically also, India has actually emerged from the word Indus and the Indus Valley and the land which falls to the south of that. So there may be an argument whether British gave it or the Greeks gave it or who gave it or at what time this word India actually came into being. But they say that at least we never used. This was not something that we called ourselves. Whoever may have called us India, we never called ourselves India. We always called ourselves Bharat. So why should we actually use the term India? And they say that all other countries, which were colonized, when they became independent, they used the term that was theirs. They give the example of, say, Ceylon. Ceylon became Sri Lanka, Burma became Myanmar. So they say that in a way that only if you're not proud of your civilizational history will you remain tethered to a term given to you by a foreigner.
Right, and in this regard, Bharat is also mentioned in the famous RSS leader M.S. Golwalkar's book, A Bunch of Thoughts. Could you talk about what he says?
So let's understand that it's not just about that in Indian language. Like, for example, RSS says that, look, in Indian language, be it Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Bengali, it has always been called Bharat. So what is this controversy about India and Bharat? Everybody in this country, even today, calls India as Bharat. So, what's the problem? But we have to also understand that for the RSS and for the BJP, it also has a very deep cultural context. And this cultural context, if we look at Golwalkar's work and all the things that he has said when he was the second RSS chief, so his book, Bunch of Thoughts, in that he talks about Bharat in a very deep cultural context. And he says that the very name Bharat denotes that this is our mother. In our cultural tradition, the respectful way of calling a woman is by her child's name. He says, we say she is Ramu's mother. So also is the case with the name Bharat for our motherland. Bharat is an elder brother of ours, born long, long before us. He was a noble, virtuous and victorious king and a shining model of Hindu manhood. When a woman has more than one child, we call her by the name of her eldest or the most well-known among her children. He also says that India was a name given by the British and it was the failure of independent India's leadership that they tethered the country to this term and did not accept Bharat as the name of the country. And he has also equated Bharat, it is a running theme in his texts, with Hinduism. And he says actually Bharat is land of the Hindus. So it has a deep cultural context as well for the RSS.
And Deeptiman, have we actually seen attempts to change India's name in the past from India to Bharat?
Interestingly, if we talk about RSS has never passed a single resolution to change India's name to Bharat. From 1950, there have been multiple resolutions till date. In fact, there are 2 resolutions every year. But even though in all those resolutions, it has always used the term Bharat for India, yet some leaders say that it was never found necessary because this is our cultural practice. It didn't matter. However, in the Constituent Assembly debates, there have been attempts later in independent India. In 2004, very, very interestingly, a resolution was brought in the UP Assembly when Mulayam Singh Yadav was heading the government, and it was brought by the government, and there was a discussion in the assembly over it, and the BJP walked out. That is something the BJP leaders can explain as to, all this controversy that is happening now, why they walked out at that time. There may have been political reasons for it. So again, in 2015, there was a petition which was brought to the Supreme Court, which again wanted the name to be changed to Bharat. And this petition was eventually dismissed by the Supreme Court on the ground that, both the names are already there in the Constitution. And even the central government gave an affidavit in the Supreme Court to the same effect that there is absolutely no need to do this.
And at this point, we should also address the rumors that have been floating around on social media that the government plans to officially change the country's name. So are there any plans to do that?
It's very difficult to know the plans of this government, to be frank. But be that as it may, Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Thakur yesterday came out and said that these were rumors. And even though that there are two invitations in public domain, which call President of Bharat and Prime Minister of Bharat, yet the government has maintained that the emergency session of the parliament, which is being held very soon, will not have bill or anything of that kind. At least at this moment, it is being called a rumor. So we have to go by what the government is saying. But who knows? In times to come, we may see something like that.
And Deeptiman, how has the BJP responded to this controversy and the opposition's criticisms?
The BJP has said that this is a controversy which has been created by the Congress and that there is no controversy at all. Why are people protesting it? Are they not comfortable with the word Bharat? The whole nation calls it Bharat, so what is the problem? Why are they so, attached to a term given by foreigners? And it is there in the Constitution, so what is the problem? They say that we are only giving primacy to Bharat because it is these people, that is the Congress and the opposition, who have distorted history and decimated our civilizational history and culture. So they say that if we are giving primacy to Bharat, why are they having a problem? So obviously now it has become a sort of a political slugfest where the Congress is saying that this name is being changed merely because the opposition alliance is called India, and the BJP is saying that these are people who are not proud of their civilizational history, and that is why they're making a controversy out of it. So it's interesting to see how this is going to pan out.
And next we talk about how people from a border town in Manipur found refuge in Myanmar. As many of you may already be aware, Manipur has been grappling with violence since the 3rd of May, when ethnic clashes erupted between its two key communities, the Meiteis and the Kuki tribes. Since that time, over 160 individuals have tragically lost their lives, the state's law and order machinery has experienced a complete breakdown, and the extent of property destruction has been so extensive that thousands of residents throughout the state have been displaced from their homes. And to illustrate just how dire things are in the state, in this segment, we talk about what happened when this violence reached the town of Moreh.
So, Moreh is a really small town. It's essentially a market town, which is located in Manipur's Tengnopal district.
That's Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who has been reporting on Manipur for the paper.
And it is located right at India's international border with Myanmar. So there is like a gate of friendship and all of that. And it's a town with an extremely mixed population. So though the majority population there is Kuki, you also have Meiteis, you also have a large Tamil population, you even have Punjabis, Bengalis, Nepalis. So it's a very mixed population which is largely dependent on trade. And this trade is cross-border trade.
And when the violence reached Moreh, around 400 residents of this border town fled to the neighboring country of Myanmar in search of refuge. And while some of the residents began returning to Manipur by the end of May, others remained in Myanmar for over 100 days. To understand why the people of Moreh traveled to Myanmar and how they successfully did so, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Sukrita in this segment.
So Sukrita, tell us how the violence in the state played out in Moreh.
So Moreh was one of the flashpoints of the violence in Manipur. So as you know, the violence in Manipur had begun in the border of Churachandpur and Bishnupur district, right? After the tribal solidarity rally on 3rd May. And as news spread, it flared up in different places. So Moreh, as you know, we explored, is one of those places. So, within the first few days, large numbers of people from the Meitei community took shelter in the Assam Rifles camp, which is there. So the Assam Rifles is the security agency that is responsible for border security along the Myanmar border. So thousands of people of Meiteis had moved into that Assam Rifles camp, and there was arson of houses and of Meitei-owned shops in Moreh, and a small section of the Meitei residents of Moreh felt that the best option that was available to them was to cross over the border to Myanmar. And many of them, like 212 of them, only came back last month. So they were there for like more than 100 days in another country.
And can you tell us how these people managed to cross this international border and the kind of challenges they faced?
So India's border with Myanmar is a porous one, and it is like largely unfenced. Only in the last couple of years in Manipur, the work of fence building begun, and as it stands now, the fence only a 10-kilometer stretch is fenced, and Manipur's border with Manipur is around 390 kilometers. It's a porous border, and the fundamental livelihood of people in Moreh at the border is cross-border trade. So on the Indian side of this border is the market at Moreh, which, like we said, all these various communities have their businesses there. And just on the other side of the border, there's a market called Namphaalong on the Myanmar side. And a little ahead, a couple of kilometers in, there's a town called Tamu. That's also a commercial town. So the livelihoods of the people in these market towns is dependent on each other, like trade with each other. And, there has been a thriving cross-border trade in this area. So one of the localities where a lot of the Meitei population in Moreh is concentrated is called Premnagar. And that is located just next to the border. So when arson started taking place in Moreh, they kind of started heading towards the border. And when they saw that, the situation is not abating, they moved into Namphaalong, which I said is just on the other side of the border. And it's in Namphaalong that they spent the first 4 days, and they were being housed by their business associates. I mean, people who they've known through trade or because they've lived in such close proximity with each other that they've, known all their lives, right? It's just a stone's throw away. So according to what some of these people have told me, there were around, say, 15 people, 20 people who were staying together in the house of one of those traders, and it was viable to stay in people's houses, in someone's personal house for that long. So they were advised to move to Tamu, which, as I said, is a couple of kilometers in, and they were asked to move into a monastery there. So that monastery is where they stayed for the rest of this prolonged period.
And Sukrita, you have written that many of the people of Myanmar who gave refuge to the Moreh residents were once refugees themselves. Talk to us about that and how that helped the people from this border town.
So, as you know, there was the military coup in Myanmar in 2021, and that was followed by a pretty brutal crackdown against dissidents and resistance. So at that point of time, we know that there was a huge Myanmar refugee crisis, right? And people were flowing into neighboring countries. So at that time, amongst those, people who were fleeing to India at that time were the residents of Tamu and Namphaalong. So they had fled over and they had gone to Moreh. So the Meiteis who had sought refuge, who I spoke to, they said, we know these people not just from business but also from that period. And that period when they stayed in Moreh is when their bonds became much deeper. So they said that some stayed for a month, some stayed for as much as 3 months in Moreh, and they were put up in this multi-story mall in Moreh. So they pooled together resources and provided food to the people who had come over from Myanmar. So there had been like a community support system for people who came over from Myanmar, and then they eventually went back. So, what one of the people who sought refuge said was that there was almost a sense of give and take. you helped us when we were in need, so, of course we're going to help you when you're in need. So likewise, when these people were staying in the monastery, they were being housed by the monks there, but the rations for food, they said, was all mobilized by the local business people. So they put together the resources, they donated food, and that's how they sustained.
Right, and now even though people have been returning to Manipur, the business activity that once thrived in this region before the clashes erupted has come to a halt. So can you talk about how the ongoing violence affected trade and business relations between the two bordering regions and what challenges the traders are facing now?
Look, Manipur is gripped by conflict, right? So not just the trade in Moreh, just any kind of economic activity in any part of Manipur, be it agriculture, business, everything is almost, at a standstill for this long. But the issues at Moreh have, trade had been slowing down because in 2020, the border was closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. And then that continued to be in place because of the military coup. And then this violence broke out because, which, like I told you, there's just been an all-round stagnation in economic activity. So for the last couple of years, Moreh hasn't been that same bustling place that it is renowned for being. So from what one of the Meitei people who had sought refuge in Myanmar told me is that the people who, he was in touch with from Tamu, they said that they're seeking business opportunities elsewhere. So, in Yangon or in Mandalay, and that they'll come back if and when things stabilize. So, a number of factors has destabilized the trade in this region.
And in the end, we talk about IIM-Calcutta, one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. The Indian Express has learned that the director of IIM-Calcutta, Uttam Kumar Sarkar, has resigned from his position over differences with the institute's board chairman. This is the second IIMC head in 2 years who has left before completing their 5-year term. In this segment, Indian Express's Ritika Chopra, who broke the story for the paper, joins us to talk about it. Ritika, first tell us, what reasons did Uttam Sarkar give for resigning from his position?
So first, I think we should clarify that he has resigned. His resignation letter is dated 23rd of August, but it hasn't been accepted yet because it needs to be accepted by the Board of Governors, which is the highest decision-making body of an IIM. But from what we've learned in his letter, he hasn't specified any specific reason, unlike his predecessor who had very detailed reasons, but he's resigned on personal grounds.
Right, and his predecessor was Anju Seth, who was actually the first woman director of IIM-Calcutta. But this happening within the span of a little over 2 years, what is it symptomatic of?
So what's interesting is that there is a common thread between two resignations. One, of course, Anju Seth went on record with it. Professor Sarkar, what we learned from our sources, he hasn't said that in as many words, but people within the institute have noticed some tension between him and the chairperson. Anju Seth in her letter was very open about it. She labeled it as a breakdown of trust. That is what ties these two resignations together. Honestly, everyone in the IIM community is seeing this as a result of an all-powerful board, which was created by an IIM Act, which of course the unbridled autonomy that an IIM has under the Act. I mean, it has been very recently amended and we can come to that later. But in 2018, when it was implemented, it gave the sweeping powers to the board. This is just one example of those freedoms, or rather that plan not working out in the way that the act or the law or the government envisioned. So what's happened here is that it seems like in every IIM, every IIT, like I said, there is a highest decision-making body, which is called the Board of Governors. That Board of Governors is headed by a chairperson who usually is somebody from the business sector for an IIM. And for an IIT, could be a scientist, again, some could also be an industrialist. And these chairpersons, their role is very titular in nature, where they're there. I wouldn't call them as placeholders, but they're there. They have a role to play, but they're not very involved in the day-to-day functioning of the institution. In the case of IIM-Calcutta, from what we gather from our sources, in case of both resignations, it seems like the directors have been uncomfortable with the level of the chairperson's involvement in the institution's day-to-day working. So, yeah, it's just essentially the result, or rather an unexpected result of the sweeping powers given to a board. And by virtue of that, then obviously the board is headed by the chairperson. And it's a tussle between the director and the chairperson.
And when we talk about these sweeping powers, what have been the criticism against them?
There have been criticisms, but a lot of that has happened off record, even within the IIM community, because there was a feeling that maybe some of those freedoms were being misused because the freedom is of an unprecedented level, let's say.
Could you give us some examples of that?
To a point that it's a self-appointing board. So earlier it was the government which used to appoint the board and the board members. And now the chairperson would constitute a panel. That panel would eventually appoint. So the board would appoint or reappoint its chairperson and members. So it was one of the biggest powers that it has. And as you can see, then that would eventually have a trickle-down effect on how an institution also functions. I mean, of course, the government, after handing over all that power to the IIMs, has sort of always been uncomfortable purely because I think typically a Babu doesn't like being told off, which had kind of started happening after the act came in because they wanted certain things done and the IIMs turned around and said that, you no longer have those powers over us and we won't do it. But that aside, increasingly, at least among the newer IIMs, not maybe so much among the older IIMs, again, because they have those traditions, that legacy, some well-entrenched ways. But among newer IIMs, there was, feeling that maybe we're better off with some kind of oversight by the government. But I would say even in the long term, rather not long term, but overwhelmingly, the view was that maybe the benefits outweigh the disadvantages.
Right, and now considering these two resignations, what do you think the board should do about it?
I think what the board needs to keep in mind is that it shouldn't try and exercise the kind of power that maybe the government exercised over the board in the past. So the board should also give the director, who is the academic and administrative head of the institution, the autonomy, just as how the act has empowered them. Maybe the board should also empower the director to that same level. Empowerment of the board doesn't mean that it exercises more control over an institution. I mean, that is, like I said, that was not the vision. So it can't be that the government was replaced by the board, So, yeah, that's what they should keep in mind.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, with help from Utsa, Sarmin, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.